Welcome to the Real Estate Syndication Show. Whether you are a seasoned investor or building a new real estate business, this is the show for you. Whitney Sewell talks to top experts in the business. Our goal is to help you master real estate syndication. And now your host, Whitney Sewell.
This is your daily real estate syndication show. I'm your host, Whitney Sewell. Today our guest is Jeff Greenberg. Thanks for being on the show again, Jeff.
Well, thank you, Whitney. I'm happy to be here.
Now, you probably remember Jeff's name. He's been on the show a couple times. In the previous episode was show 229, WS229. Jeff has some great experience. He's been in this business a long time, done many deals, which I'm going to tell you a little about. And I'm thankful to have him back on the show to be able to share from his experience and teach us many lessons that he's learned. But over 40 years of experience in management, staff supervision, development, and training. He's the CEO of Synergetic Investment Group, LLC, also known as SIG, investing in multifamily and student housing assets since 2007. He's been an investor in $40 million of multifamily projects consisting of over 1,000 units. SIG currently controls 317 student housing beds and properties in Georgia, Arizona, and Ohio, currently under contract on 2 properties in Texas and Kentucky, totaling 292 units. They're focused on value-add student housing, market-rate multifamily, and senior living multifamily properties. Jeff also runs 2 REI clubs and over the past 13 years and is active on Bigger Pockets and other forums. In his spare time, he road cycles 100 miles a week and spends time with his grandchildren. Wow, 100 miles a week. That seems like a long ways, Jeff.
It is, and it's been a struggle to keep that up lately, but it's out of 3 or 4 runs.
Wow, that's a way to keep moving anyway. Jeff, thank you again and for being on the show. Give the listeners a little more about who you are, but let's dive right in.
You've heard from me before, but basically I'm out here in California and I invest across the country. We're looking at value add properties, both multifamily and student housing. And ask away on the questions.
Great. Well, I'd like to know your opinion and just your take on some deal structure, how you've structured deals, and maybe let's talk about, why that, you structure them one way or the other. And, or maybe you could give us an example of a deal, and then let's dive into, exactly how it was structured and why.
The main concern that people should think about is on the deal structure. Is that both sides are going to be benefiting from it. The passive investor coming in typically is looking at it as far as is it fair to them. But I feel it's extremely important that they also look to make sure that the sponsor is going to be making some money as well if they're doing a good job. When we look at a structure, we want the investor to be protected on the downside if the numbers don't come in. And the sponsor should be protected also on the upside that they gain benefits from great performance. So typically when we're setting up a deal, we try to see what is going to be of interest to the investor, but also is going to protect both sides and also get us some cash flow if we're doing the job that we projected that we would do. And that's important. A lot of people want to look at what it is that is in it for themselves, but when you're getting in with a new sponsor and there's not going to be any cash flow for the sponsor, or there's not going to be much in it for the sponsor, all of a sudden the sponsor's got a problem that they need to keep the lights on, and if there's not money coming in. So typically we look at a deal when we're even looking at making an offer on the deal. We're looking at, okay, what can we offer the investors and what kind of structure is going to allow that. And the preferred return is typically the main thing that will make sure that the investors are comfortable, that they'll get a return prior to the sponsor getting any money. Now, let me go over a few of the pieces
Please.
where a sponsor makes their money. And typically, the sponsor will get an acquisition fee. Now, that acquisition fee is for all the effort that the sponsor put into getting, well, first of all, getting themselves educated, learning about this business, also finding the deal, getting the deal together, and bringing the investors in. And so that's an initial fee that they get. And that could be anywhere from 1% to even 5%, say on a smaller deal, of the purchase price. And that they get typically upfront at the closing. The next one they would get is a percentage of the cash flow. Now, typically, that percentage is going to be after a preferred return. Preferred return essentially is a return on the investor's investment. So if you were to get say an 8% preferred return, you would get that prior to the syndicator receiving any funds or any cash flow. Now, the preferred return isn't guaranteed, and it's handled in many different ways. But we'll come back to that because it's going to get a little complicated, and I'll explain that.
Please.
But so after the preferred return, the investor would start getting their shares of the distribution. Then the third one typically is the profit at sale. And that profit at sale comes after the investors get all of their investment back, and then the profit is split. And that split could be anywhere from 80 to the investors, 20 to the sponsor. It could be a 70-30 to the investors. 70 to the investors, 30 to the sponsor. It could be, 60-40. The only time I've seen it typically at 50-50 is in development deals, where there's a lot more work involved for the sponsor. Those may be 50-50. Okay, so that's typically your split at the end. Let's go back to the the one other fee, which really is an ongoing fee, would be the asset management fee. And that could be typically anywhere from 1 to 3% of the revenue goes to the person that basically is on the sponsor's team, but is the middleman between the property manager and the team, the sponsor's team. So you've got that person that is working for the next 5 to 10 years as that intermediary and working with the property management. Some of the newer people come in and think, okay, I'm going to hire a professional property management, and then I can go back to sleep and do whatever. And that's very far from true. You need somebody on your team that is keeping an eye on the property manager, meeting with the property manager. In the beginning, we meet weekly with the management team, and as time goes on and things are going well, you can spread that out maybe every other week, every 3 weeks. We were doing it, my Houston property. We moved to once a month. And then when we had nothing to talk about on once a month, we started, even doing that less. But initially, you're doing that, you're going to go over budget and all kinds of other things, how well things are performing. So those are the essential fees. But let's go back to the preferred return. And there's some different ways that I've seen people do this as well.
Yeah, and and I want to hit that, but I wanted to go back. One thing you mentioned that I really like too, like the acquisition fee, and I hear people get pushed back about acquisition fees and things like that. And I would almost say, well, if the investor doesn't want you to make money, then maybe they need to find another deal to invest in. But what they don't see is that, like, all the work you've put in, not even on this deal, but all the deals you've turned away, time and time and time and time again, making sure that you have the best deal you can have for them to invest in.
Absolutely. And, the thing is basically the syndicator is bringing people together. And if you look at any other type of deal where somebody is acting in that capacity, where they're bringing people together, bringing a buyer and seller together, or just bringing, some group together, creating a company or whatever it happens to be, bringing in some synergy, they're going to get paid for that, because that's a lot of work that they've done. It's a lot of time that they've spent, and they need to be compensated for that. They need to keep the lights on and keep things going. So, we don't want to be greedy when we're deciding what the percentage is.
Right.
And so if you look at it on a small deal, maybe it's going to be a 5%, but maybe on a bigger deal, it's going to be 1 or 2%. So that way the sponsor is also compensated and can keep their business running.
Right.
And that's important. And the thing is a lot of times when we get into a deal, if we haven't done a full raise, that we have to continue the raise after the closing, we don't get that acquisition fee until all the money is in. And once the money's all in and everything's set up and things are rolling, then we can go ahead and take that fee.
Nice. I appreciate you elaborating on that. Yeah, and please elaborate on the preferred return.
Yeah. Now on the preferred return, there's people that do it in all different fashions. Typically, the preferred return, and this is not a guaranteed return, the preferred return will be on the cash flow, available distributable cash will go to the investor until they received whatever that dollar amount or that percentage is. Say it's an 8% return. So say they invested $100,000. So once on an annual basis, the preferred return would give them $8,000 a year. Okay. Now, typically on your first year, you may not reach that. And here's where some of the differences come in. There are some sponsors that will carry that over to the next year. So say you only got $6,000, so you only got a 6% return. And now the next year comes around, that 8% picks up that 2 that you didn't get. And so now your preferred return for that year coming up is a 10%. Now, maybe they still only received a 6. That could be continued to be carried forward until the end, when finally the property is sold. Now, that could be a problem, because if you notice, the sponsor isn't getting anything during this time. Now, they may be getting the money from the asset management fee. I know some people that have their own property management company, so they're getting money from there. But otherwise, if you see a deal where that's the proposal, the sponsor may not be getting any money during the hold, which is not a great thing. The next thing is okay, so say we do get that 8%. Say there's instead of that $8,000, say just for example, so there's $10,000 that's available for distribution. Okay, you give out the $8,000, which is the preferred return. Now, I've seen some sponsors that will say, okay, that last $2,000 or that last 2%, we're going to do whatever the split is. Okay, say we were going to do a 70-30 split. So now we're going to take that 2% and do a 70-30 split on that. Well, that sponsor's not getting much money out of that either. So the 70 going to the investor and 30 going to the sponsor, that sponsor is not going to be able to, pay the bills with that limited amount of money. So the way that we do it, well, first of all, there's some people that will take that amount that the well, let me back up. Okay, what we do is we allow a catch-up. Okay, so if it was, say, let's just say an 80-20 split, because that will make the numbers easy. So now the sponsor's gotten their 8%, they've gotten their $8,000, and there's 2,000 more. Well, we're going to take that as the sponsor because that's our catch up. That's our 80-20 split. Okay, so the next year, say there's $12,000 to distribute. So that one we're going to give the first 8% to the investor. We're going to get the next 2% or the next $2,000. That catches us up on that 80-20 split. And now we're going to do an 80-20 on whatever's left over because now we're on an even scale. Okay.
Yeah.
So typically we'll tell people that they're going to get the split, or excuse me, they're going to get a preferred return, or they're going to get the split, whichever is higher. Okay. So
Okay.
so if we just took that $12,000 and did a straight 80-20 split, they would get the same amount of money. They would get more than the $8,000, whatever that comes out to. Okay. So it can be a little confusing. And there are some people that will take that accumulation of money that they didn't get from their preferred return and give that at the end. So I know this is a little confusing, but it's good to be clear how that preferred return is going to be used.
Yes.
And if it's going to be accumulated all the way and held back at the end, and where you're going to get it. But again, I want to emphasize that it's important to make sure that the sponsor is getting money as well.
Right.
We did a deal. The first deal I did, we had an 8% preferred, and we held that property because this was a small property, probably a little small to be syndicated. It was in a very stable market. I may have talked about this one before. There wasn't a lot of money in there. We expected to raise rents. Well, this was a 3-year-old property. The rents were where they probably should have been, and we weren't able to raise rents, so we were never able to get beyond that 8% preferred return. So for 6 years, we didn't make any money. We didn't make a dime, and we didn't have an asset management fee in there. So for 6 years, we ran the property without getting any money at all, and we got a small profit at the end. Well, we proved to our investors that we were dedicated, that we supported them, but we weren't being paid, and we made like I said, a small profit at the end. But
I appreciate you sharing that. That says a lot about you, though, as well. I mean, you kept working on that property, making sure your investors got that preferred return as promised.
Absolutely. And what I was going to say is a lot of people may have difficulty doing that. If you're having difficulty paying the bills, I mean, we weren't living on that money, so we were fine. But it was extra work, and it took that dedication. Other people that thought that they were going to jump into this business and be making all kinds of money may not be able to afford to do that. And so you do want to make sure that your sponsor is making some money, and they may not put the dedication in to do that. So those are important key ingredients in this. I'm not sure if I missed anything on the structure, but any other things that you want me to clear up?
Yeah, that's you've covered a lot. It's really good information. I appreciate you elaborating, on the structure. And tell me, when would or is there a way that when you go into looking at a deal that helps you to know how to structure it? Is there like a specific preferred return you want for investors, or specific way you want them to be paid that says, okay, this is, this deal's not going to work, or maybe we structure it a little differently so we meet those returns that you're trying to receive, or is there a different way that you go into it?
Well, we do go into the deal looking at what structure or what return is going to interest our investors. And typically on all of our deals, we've done an 8%. Nowadays, I know people getting in there at 7% and 6% because the returns are harder to come by, and these returns are still a lot better than most people are getting in their other investments. But it's basically knowing your investors and what their interest is. I had a gentleman contact me that he had investors he wanted to bring in, but he said we were paying too much money. that he didn't want his investors to be spoiled, and that if we had a deal that fit his criteria, he would bring in 90% of the equity with his investors, but it had to be, at a lower return, because he didn't want them spoiled. They were happy with what they were getting, and that's what he wanted.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I was going to ask you, just like, as far as deals going forward, how this has changed, or is it changing? Just because, it is harder to find deals that work and make the numbers work. And so, are you trying to pull that down from 8%? It seems like it's been pretty standard, but I have seen more people doing like a 6% preferred return lately. And is that something, you're considering or are doing as well?
Yeah, we've been considering that. And the other thing that we consider is the split, where we're going to put the split. And it's all based on our projections of returns. I know some people now that are doing no preferred returns. There's some big sponsors that are doing an 80-20 split and no preferred return at all, that everybody gets a split right up front and it goes all the way through. I know another friend of mine that is giving 100% of the distributions to the investors, and then I think they're doing a 70-30 at the back end. So they're not worried about getting any cash flow at all. They are doing an asset management fee, so they're getting that cash flow, but they're not doing any cash flow through the hold, which is, I don't know, interesting.
That is interesting. So, as far as, yeah, and I appreciate you sharing too, as far as, some people not doing preferred returns, but just doing a split. And could you elaborate on that a little bit, and maybe what's their motivation to do it that way?
Well, they must know, their investors, and that their investors will be good with the, with that offering. That's the main thing, is that it works with their investors, with their projections. That's, it's knowing what will interest the investors. As a syndicator, without investors, we're not working. We have to have investors to pull the deals together. And if we can't create a deal structure that the investors are interested in, we're essentially out of business.
Great point. Great point. And Jeff, I feel like you've covered it really well, and you've elaborated on many points that I wanted to make sure were covered. Anything else about structuring a deal that you wanted to tell the listeners, or anything at all?
Well, the thing that we didn't really talk about is something called waterfalls.
Right.
Which is something that I haven't done, which I would like to do. The main thing, and first I'll tell you the reason for waterfalls. The preferred return basically protects the investor on the downside, that they're gonna get returns before the sponsor does. What the waterfall does, it protects a little bit more of the sponsor on the upside, where if the sponsor gets past certain hurdles, certain amounts of return, then the split can change. And so if I got an investor a 15% annualized return, then my split may go from an 80-20 to a 70-30. And if I get them, a 20% return, then it may jump to a 50-50. And so that way we're getting a little bit more advantage of the upside. And where that would have come in on my deal is I had a deal, the property I sold in Houston, where my investors, that was a 60-40, well, it was either 60-40 or 70-30, don't quite remember. But they ended up getting a 40% annualized return. They got 120% in 3 years. Well, I really should have gotten a bigger piece of that, but I didn't put it in the structure when I first set it up. and therefore I had to stick with what it said in the PPM. And so they did very well, and I did fine, but I certainly could have done better with a waterfall. The reason I haven't put a waterfall in is it's a little more complicated and people are confused. And if people get confused with your structure, if you have too many moving parts, they're just going to say, I'm not interested, because they don't quite understand it. So that's the reason I wouldn't put it in. You know, I still probably will at some point, but that's why I didn't in the past. I didn't want to confuse people, but that protects the investor. The sponsor. The sponsor does a fabulous job and gets a fabulous return for investors. They deserve to get a better return as well. And the waterfall protects the sponsor on the upside.
I like that. I appreciate you. Yeah, I appreciate you talking about how it protects the sponsor on the upside. And, you know, I've heard of a team who they do no pref, like you mentioned, and no waterfalls, and their reasoning, like they'll just do a split, and their reasoning was just so investors can understand it. And it's, you know, this is just the way it is across the board. And so I've gone back and forth about different ways to structure deals, and I appreciate you talking about the waterfall as well. But as far as just doing a split, have you ever done a deal like that where you just did a split and no pref?
All of my deals have been prefs so far. The investors seem to like that.
Yeah.
The ones, and so I was kind of surprised when I heard these guys that were successful in doing with no pref, but they've got a lot of experience. They've got a great track record, and they've got a huge investor pool. So, you know, they were able to pull that off. Great.
Jeff, you're always a great guest. I always welcome you back on the show to share from your expertise. And, is there one key way that stands out to you that you take, a way that you take care of investors that helps you to stand out amongst other operators?
Well, I try to be as transparent as possible. We've started doing monthly updates. Typically, we were doing quarterly meetings, and we're still doing the quarterly meetings, conference calls, but we're starting to do monthly updates to keep people informed as far as what's going on. Also, anytime an investor contacts me, I try to get back to them within 24 hours to answer their questions or to, whatever it is they happen to need. So we just know that investors, are our customers, and we treat them as that they're very important to us, and we want to keep them happy and keep them around.
Right. All right, Jeff. Well, thank you very much. And would you share with the listeners, though, before we go, how you like to give back, and also tell them how to get in touch with you?
Well, I spend a lot of time at different meetings and conferences and help people out and give back. When I also do some coaching where I'm, giving all my advice to people. That's probably the main way that I give back is helping out people with advice and looking over some of their deals and stuff. That's probably the big way that I'm doing it.
Awesome. And how can people learn more about you and get in touch with you?
You can go to my website at www.synergetic.ig, and that's spelled SYNERGETICIG.com. And you can also write to me at jeff@synergetic.ig.com. I also get communications from Bigger Pockets as well.
Great. Jeff, thank you again for your time. Always appreciate you being on the show. Appreciate the listeners being with us today and every day. I hope you will continue to come back and grow your knowledge and grow your business and join the Real Estate Syndication Show on Facebook. Also go to LifeBridge Capital and connect with me, and we will talk to each of you tomorrow.
Thank you for listening to the Real Estate Syndication Show, brought to you by LifeBridge Capital. LifeBridge Capital works with investors nationwide to invest in real estate, while also donating 50% of its profits to assist parents who are committing to adoption. LifeBridge Capital, making a difference, one investor and one child at a time. Connect online at www.lifebridgecapital.com for free material and videos to further your success.